Hello and welcome everyone for today's conversation on how to combat fatigue. Thank you very much for joining us. This is TBQ Live. We are a part of a series of conversations that takes place hosted by Maria Chase and myself, Reena Dayal. And today we are going to be talking about fatigue, something that a lot of us have been experiencing. This is a two-part series. We're going to have part one today, where we're going to talk a bit of the science, the symptoms and the causes. We are really going to unpack that topic. And next week, we are going to be back talking about solutions because we believe that the most important way to be able to address fatigue is to understand it first. And so today's conversation is about really raising awareness about fatigue. What is it? How does it impact at a neuro level? What are the causes? What are the symptoms? So you are empowered to understand something which is really catching everybody by surprise right now, in a way. So, Maria, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Reena. It's lovely to be here. And I love the fact that we are looking at this in two parts. People are too often jumping to solutions nowadays, which the brain does. But it's nice to spend some time actually really understanding it so that we get the opportunity to change it in a really effective and consistent way.
Absolutely. So before we get into the topic, let's just tell you a little bit about TBQ Live in case you're wondering what it is all about. TBQ Live is something that really got stemmed down on a piece of work that I started off about 4 years ago. It was a book that I wrote called The Brilliance Quotient. You would have seen the picture of it in its previous slide, right on the top right corner. In case you didn't, let me just quickly go back. There we can see it. And The Brilliance Quotient was really written at a time when pre-pandemic. And at that point of time, given all the conversations that I was having with business leaders from around the world, something that was catching my attention is that life was going to become more unpredictable going forward. Already at that point of time, digital transformation was taking place. So I caught up with a lot of experts, and my book has featured more than 22 experts, Maria Chase being one of them. And we wrote a book which is called The Science and Art of Leadership, titled The Brilliance Quotient. And the strap line says, master the science and art of leadership in an unpredictable era. How unpredictable are the times right now? So that's really the inspiration for the series of TBQ Live, where we're going to come together. Maria and I will be hosting the series and speaking with different experts or having a conversation between ourselves and you, our audience, on topics that matter. It's a conversation that takes place every fortnight. We might do an exception sometimes. I know that part two of the series is happening next week, but really the aim is to talk about the 9 levers that are covered in the book. This one is really to do with mental well-being, physical well-being. And we're really going to raise awareness and discuss solutions. It's always going to be 45 minutes, and it's going to be at 12:15 GMT so that we can reach out to people around the world. So welcome once again and joining us. And before we get into the topic, Maria and I are going to do a quick introduction in case you don't know who we are. And we'd love you to put your LinkedIn connection on a chat or Facebook a connection on our chat, or just connect with us. We'd like to be in touch with you. So Maria, over to you for a quick introduction.
Thank you so much, Reena. So I've spent 25 years working with everyone across all strategic levels to maximize their performance. One of the ways I do that is to use all of the latest findings coming out from neuroscience about how we know our brain now works. Working in line with our brain gives us the absolute massive capacity to really leverage all of the skills that our brain gives us. I have worked internationally, globally. I've been featured in a global magazine and journal, peer-reviewed journal on neuroscience. I am passionate about knowing about the brain because it gives us the Haynes manual for how to get the very, very best out of ourselves. I've worked with lots of people over the world. Devon and Cornwall Constabulary, the editor of Grazia in Bahrain. And I just really am passionate about people getting that opportunity to be the very best version of themselves.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Maria. So, Maria is the co-host of TBQ Live. And for those of you who joined us right now, this is TBQ Live. We're talking about how to combat fatigue. And very soon we'll be getting into the science bit, which is the symptoms and causes of fatigue. But before I get into really unpacking that little bit about me, Maria's just introduced herself. My name is Reena. I'm a leadership accelerator, which really means that I blend executive coaching techniques, leadership training techniques and frameworks, mentoring, and HR consulting. My background is corporate HR, leadership development, transformation with FTSE 500 companies for I think more than 22 years before I started off my own business in 2015, which is the Leadership Acceleration Company. Maria and I are also co-founders of the Amplenary Academy for Entrepreneurs. That's another project that we work on together, which is fascinating. In my pro bono world, I'm the vice chair and the acting chair to IOD's largest branch, Central London, with more than 3,200 members, which is based in London, of course, being Central London, really making a difference in how the London landscape is going to look like in the future. So that's Maria and I, and we're here to talk about fatigue and how it's impacting us. So let's jump into the conversation. So here are some definitions. It's an interesting slide, and let's go through all of them, and I might read it out and pull out some bits, because the whole thing is about trying to understand what is fatigue. And these are definitions that I've picked up from various expert websites and maybe added on a few of my words, but you'll see how it's coming out. So the first one talks about fatigue is extreme tiredness that can manifest as physical weakness or mental exhaustion. So there are two elements to it. It is characterized by decreased energy, decreased motivation levels, and sometimes difficulty in concentrating. So that's what fatigue is all about. And this is really important, because one of the things that both Maria and I have realized, and a lot of you would have as well, is sometimes we don't give it the space we need it, i.e. fatigue. So we try to think, it's just another thing that's happening to me. I've just had a rough day. And which might be the case, but this conversation is really to bring to the forefront what fatigue is, so that when it happens, you recognize it in yourself as well as other people. Now, here's the other one. Mental fatigue is the feeling that your brain just won't function right. People often describe it as brain fog. When you can't concentrate, when there are too many issues in your head, the chatter in your brain is becoming too much. You just find that you're not being able to find the answer to a problem that's there, which should be really simple, but you can't think straight, is the other phrase that's used. And when that's happening consistently, it might be a symptom of fatigue. And in fact, that's another one. It is a symptom, it's not a condition. So fatigue is a symptom, and it's something that can affect you physically and mentally and psychologically, because when you're feeling that you can't really make a decision for a long time, it can start having psychological repercussions as well. And it can seriously interfere with what you are able to do on a day-to-day life if it's not addressed in the right way. And we know this is an important topic right now because of a very difficult phase that we have all experienced in the last 1 year. Now, it can affect your mood, your memory, your concentration, your decision making, and your emotional state. So clearly, the repercussions are huge, and therefore, it really makes sense for us to be talking about this particular topic. Let's move on to another slide, and I'm going to invite Maria to talk a little bit about what happens in the brain, Maria, with fatigue, and unpack it up a little bit more for me.
Okay, so fatigue, especially something like chronic fatigue, is very different than I just didn't sleep very well last night, because it has an ongoing effect on our brain physiologically, as well as then how that manifests in the world and in terms of how you can use your brain. And the thing is, the brain goes ridiculously quickly. Nerve impulses are going at 250 miles an hour. Only for a Ferrari can give it a run for its money. So the brain usually works at an incredible speed that we're not aware of. However, when we have this kind of chronic fatigue, what happens is that signaling, the impulses, the connectivity is decreased. And we all feel that. Suddenly I can't think straight is also about my brain is not working. And one of the things that happens with fatigue is it tends to promote a chemical cascade. So it's not just about I'm not okay now and I'm not okay tomorrow. It's also we get filled with adrenaline. we get filled with cortisol. I will talk in a minute to the next slide about the Limbic PFC dance. We're all getting really familiar with the phrase fight, flight, or freeze. Now, that's the brain's way of getting us ready for a threat. Nowadays, obviously, in the current climate, the threats are giant. And it means that when I'm in that primal threat state, the actual part of my brain that we take to work, our PFC, isn't working as well. The energy going through it is really severely decreased. And the thing is, thinking is a very energetic process. Although the part of our brain we use is tiny, it's 4% of the brain's mass, it actually uses 20% of the body's overall resources. And what's happening in the pandemic is our body's going, there is a threat around all of the time. It's chronic, which means our body is readying us for this fight, flight, or freeze response, which means it's just guzzling energy. So burnout and chronic fatigue and exhaustion were very prevalent prior to the pandemic. The pandemic has actually exacerbated that problem. So if we go on to the next slide, Rena, I'm going to talk through some of the science and get down to the nitty gritty. When we say we can't think straight or think at all, that's because when we are tired, our body is trying to feel like, I've got to do something. I've got to do something. And we get into that slight panicky feeling because when we are tired, the body's going, okay, I can't function as well as I normally would do. So it's going, okay, I'm going to release some adrenaline and give you that punchy feeling. And I'm also going to release a huge amount of cortisol, which focuses where we put our awareness. So we start looking at what's the next thing I can do? What's the next thing I can do? And I would imagine a lot of people are recognizing these things because we live in a very fast-paced professional world. If we've got one deadline, we've also got another 7 waiting. If we've got things to do, we need other things that are, we have lists, endless to-do lists. So the thing that the body responds by doing is filling us with adrenaline, filling us with cortisol, and getting us ready to fight, flight, or freeze. Because that's a very primal, very clever response by the body, but it turns off your thinking part of the brain. So it's kind of counterintuitive. Because if I am trying to thrive and survive, which is what the brain's first job is, what I'm not doing is having that ability to use my higher executive functions, which is the PFC. So that's why when we are tired, we can't think straight, because that part of the brain actually has hardly energy going through it. And we feel more stressed out because, as I just said, we get this cortisol cascade in our body, which is the stress hormone, it's got a bad rep. It gets us out of bed. Cortisol is the thing that motivates us to an extent, but too much, just like anything, tips us over. And then we just get that sense of stress, which increases the sense of urgency, which makes us more tired, and off that vicious circle goes. And the reason that our go-to healthy snacks are not what we're reaching for is because the body, in its thinking part, uses 20% of the body's over resources, and it only uses glucose. So the brain's very clever. It goes, I don't need something that will slow release some carbs. I need sugar, and I need it now. So suddenly we are now wanting sugar. And the thing being, when we're tired, there is the hunger hormone, which suddenly is surged through our body. It's called ghrelin. And it makes us more hungry than we usually would, because the body's going, give me some glucose, give my brain some glucose. So we're much more hungry, much more quickly, because suddenly our new hormone for hunger is being released. And you can't sleep as well, even though that's crazy, because you are tired. Because if we're playing this kind of catch up, which is what fatigue always feels like, what happens is we are now full of cortisol. That actually stops our melatonin, which puts us to sleep, working, because they're diametrically opposite. If I am needing to be energetic, I'm going to have cortisol and adrenaline, and I am going to decrease my melatonin. So although we're really tired, our melatonin production, which is the hormone that actually gets us going to sleep, the production is really, really limited. So that's why you can't sleep. And then that just exacerbates this problem. That's why fatigue is chronic, because it feeds into itself. You know, things like our lips are constantly cracked and dry. Collagen production is while we're sleeping. So collagen is why our lips won't suddenly heal, because we're not getting that production. And the thought of the gym, we are tired. Our body's going, well, that's a very simple understanding of that. I am just going to sit down. The difficulty being is it's movement that creates the production of dopamine, which is our motivational hormone. It's what makes us want to do things. It's what gives us that sense of goal achievement. So that's why when we have this chronic fatigue, the last thing that we want to do is go to the gym, even though that would actually be a really helpful thing to do, because dopamine's produced just behind the kidneys. We need to move our body, and we're sat down a lot. There's a lot of working practices nowadays that are encouraging fatigue accidentally because we're sat in front of computers. And our mood is tumultuous because our early warning alarm system is located in our limbic system, which is where our emotional awareness, how we process emotions, where we feel emotions is happening. So if I am tired and my limbic system is negatively activating because of all of this fatigue and potential threat and my sense of urgency, suddenly my limbic system is throwing up all these different moves to try and counter. The brain's constantly trying to help you, but accidentally sometimes doesn't help us. It kind of is, it goes in the opposite direction, which is why we get so moody. We're also not sleeping properly, which is why we get so moody. We feel short of breath because the body's very clever. The brain's very clever. It's going, if I need to survive, I need to bring a lot of oxygen into my body, into my muscles really quickly. So it starts doing that kind of short breath that's only here. It's never to the diaphragm, because that gives us those quick bursts of energy. However, we're not running, we're not fighting. So those quick bursts of energy are not helping us. We actually need to take really long breaths. And we are feeling common, that permanent office cold, because if we're not getting some sleep, we are not regenerating our body. The plaque in our brain, which is what happens as a result of all the amazing connections and connectivity and all that fast processing, is not getting released, which dampens our immune system. So that's the thing about fatigue, is it kind of is like a snake that eats itself. So it just carries on and carries on and carries on. And those are just a few of the brain effects. Our brain then affects our physicality. Our muscles are fatigued because they're getting ready all the time to fight, flight, or freeze. All of this means actually fatigue becomes chronic, which then feeds into itself. So that's a quick insight into what's happening in our brain while we are experiencing this fight, flight, or freeze, which is exacerbated by the situation and also our very, very fast pace of working life nowadays.
Thanks so much, Maria. That's absolutely brilliant. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're picking up about this whole thing about how it's physical as well as mental manifestations that are taking place with chronic fatigue. And the word chronic is really important because we all have a day which is tiring, but when it's happening constantly, which is what we've been experiencing, as Maria has been talking about, it starts becoming something which is a little bit more dangerous, and you might want to pay attention. And there's a great ways of trying to figure out the symptoms of what fatigue might look like. And now here, there are a couple of things that Maria's talked about. I'm going to build on one of them and then ask her a question before we move on to the next slide. So she's been talking about cortisol, dopamine. You've been hearing about these hormones and chemicals in the body. Here's a very quick science bit about trying to understand energy levels, because it's quite a powerful concept as such, and it kind of just helps you understand what's happening in your body. So as human beings, I just want you to think about, we all need energy, right? We get that concept. We all need energy to do things. And Maria's talked about how we use dopamine and how we use cortisol. And there's this whole concept of anabolic and catabolic energy that I'd like to just very quickly introduce to you. is that think about energy like in a spectrum. It's not a spectrum, but for a moment, think about it like in a spectrum. And on one end, you have a mechanism that's taking place in the body where instant energy is required. And therefore, it's breaking down cells at a very molecular level to instantly give you energy to have the fight, flight, freeze syndrome that Maria was talking about. And primarily, what it releases is adrenaline and cortisol. So those are the and in a short burst, it's good because sometimes when you see somebody nice who makes your heart flutter, that's great. Or you need energy to get up in the morning, that's good. So short bursts of adrenaline and cortisol is good, but when it's on a sustained long basis, it starts eating away your body because it's destructive. Which is why you might need to do things to address it, but we'll come to the solutions later on. On the other side of the spectrum is what we would call anabolic energy, where the body requires energy in a different state of being and releases hormones known as dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. I think so. There's a very popular song that's gone live right now by Girl in Red called Serotonin. So those are what we call. Sometimes people call it the happy hormones, but it's really the hormones that's giving you that burst of energy, and that you're experiencing anabolic energy or dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin when you are having feelings like being calm, being excited, being in the flow, being able to think clearly, having different perspectives, having more choices, feeling that you have the freedom to do things that you want to do, feeling very passionate about certain things, feeling happy. And when you're experiencing too much of adrenaline and cortisol, you're feeling fear, anger, anxiety, stress, and all of those things are something that we've all been experiencing. And too much of that then starts leading to the signs that Maria was talking about, and thereon to fatigue. But before I move on to the next slide, very quickly, Maria, going back to you, you mentioned that you're going to talk about the PFC and limbic dance. Can you take a couple of minutes just to tell us about what's the PFC? What do you mean by the PFC limbic dance? 2 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Okay. So the brain's overarching organizing principle is to move us away from threat and towards reward. It's scanning for danger 15 times a second. If any threat comes in, then it activates what's called the limbic system, which is where our early warning alarm system sits. That's the system that gets us ready for fight, flight, or freeze and starts that adrenaline cortisol hormone cascade. When that is happening, the PFC, which is where it's just located just behind our forehead, is what we take to work. It's where all of our higher executive functions happen. So it's the prefrontal cortex. It's where our short-term memory lies, which is why when we're fatigued and in that fight, flight, or freeze, we don't remember stuff because it doesn't even go into our short-term memory. So the limbic PFC dance is normally we're nicely balanced. So the brain is working in that symphony of function. So all of the brain is working. But if we perceive any kind of threat, what happens is all the energy is taken away from every brain system, shot down our spinal cord into our muscles, readying us to survive no matter what that takes, which turns off instantly our higher thinking process. So instead of having that wonderful balance and symphony of the whole brain working together, one part of the brain totally takes over and turns everything off. And it's not until we then do certain things to help that then that balance is that equilibrium is rebalanced. So I call it the limbic PFC dance because when one works, the other stops and steps back. And then if the other comes forward, so it's kind of like that dance of if one's working, the other one isn't. It's getting that wonderful balance. And that's why something, the concept of balance is so powerful, especially when it comes to your brain. So
thank you. Thank you so much. And again, we'll be talking about how you can attain the PFC limbic balance in our next part. So just to connect the dot back to what Maria just talked about. So when it's fatigue, what's happening is that the limbic system is working. And the limbic system will always get priority because that's the function that needs to keep you safe or in survival mode. So right now, when we're experiencing all that we're experiencing lockdown, we are experiencing threat, we are experiencing unemployment, we're experiencing grief of people we have lost, we're hearing the news. Our limbic is on high alert all the time. So therefore, what's happening is it's more open to having fatigue at this moment of time. So I hope we're being able to unpack this a little bit more for you. Let's go into on a couple of other slides just to unpack this a bit more for another 20 minutes, and then we close off today's conversation. For those of you who are joining us right now, thank you very much for joining us. This is TBQ Live. We are having a series which runs every fortnight, which is on different topics that helps you become far more productive. Today, we are talking about how do you combat fatigue, part 1. We're going through the science of it. And next week, we'll be back talking about the solutions. Right. And there's Maria Chase, who's a neuroscience executive coach, and myself, Rena, who's a leadership accelerator, who are hosting TBQ Live for you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the causes. I think we've already started unpacking it, but here's another slide just to remind us and make us aware that what might be causing fatigue for us. And I'm going to invite Maria for a few comments as well. So King's College kind of made this research and said that 30% of the population experience fatigue at any one time. This number has dramatically gone up in the last year because of the exceptionally different circumstances that we have been experiencing. And all of us have been experiencing these difficult circumstances, to be honest. It's just not one of us. But what is it that causes fatigue per se? There are certain things that have been created as clusters out here, which will start making you understand whether it's happening with yourself or somebody else. And again, Maria and I have been talking about it. So things that are happening to our body. So are we sleeping enough? Are we just tiring ourselves too much doing something or sitting in front of the screen at, 14, 16, 18 hours? There are stories around that, isn't it? Because you're working on the screen, you're entertaining on the screen, you're connecting with your friends and relatives on the screen again. So everything is, you're using your body in a particular posture at any point of time. So that starts creating a problem. Now, we do know that alcohol, drugs is also a big, big issue at this moment of time because people feel that's a quick fix to be able to address the fatigue that they're experiencing. But what happens in the body is it becomes even more tired, and scientifically it struggles to try to come out of it. And therefore, you think you need more of that, or you might start having other symptoms as well. Less water. I mean, let's face it, just talking to the point that Maria was making earlier on, is that sometimes, when you are drinking water per se, it just refreshes your brain. It energizes the brain, that energy that's required at any point of time. So it becomes really important to be able to address that as well. Or continuous activities you might be doing, some of those things. So what you do with your body could be causing fatigue. But also the pressures of life. We talked about the short-term stress, which might be fine, waking up in the morning, having that short burst of energy. You want to go into a new project, so really excited for that first meeting. So you're feeling your heart palpitations. That's great stuff. But when it's prolonged stress, or you keep having different stress triggers, that's when fatigue starts coming in. So it's okay to have short-term stress. So let's be very clear about it. In fact, it's quite productive. I'll take you through the Yerkes-Dodson model in a bit. But continuous stress and prolonged stress can start creating a problem. Lifestyles and life events. Let's face it, right now, you might be a single parent, you might be living alone, you might be unemployed, lockdown, trauma, even that whole thing about sometimes being a perfectionist, multitasking, wanting to be an achiever, and then you have all of this chaos taking place. So the lifestyle and life events can also lead to fatigue, as you can understand, because now you started understanding the science behind it. Yeah, go for it.
If I can interject there, one of the things when perfectionism,
yes,
the highest achievers are the ones very often who experience the most fatigue, because they're the ones who want to get most done, which is fantastic and is what we all applaud. However, it's that balance again, because if you're overachieving, you're just kind of biting into the things that actually allowed you to achieve in the first place. So it's really important. We do have that alpha mentality, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's also nothing in excess is one of the great things to remember.
Absolutely, really good point. And again, for a moment, don't think that we are saying that perfectionist is not all right. It's good,
Yeah.
but it's about having that balance. And the people who are achieving at this moment of time, great, but it's about how you want to achieve. And therefore, this whole realm of work that Maria and I do around, playing to your strengths, making sure that you're grounded in your values, making sure that you're knowing you're resting well, you're managing that balance in your life, because that's what helps you become a perfectionist without experiencing fatigue and breakdown and burnout. So it's really knowing how to manage that out well as well. But that's a whole different topic that we'd like to go in some other time. And also nutrition, nutrition, hormonal balances, whether you're taxing or overtaxing your brain. Murray, let me just pause there for a minute. Any other couple of comments you want to pick out from this slide beyond perfectionism and comment on it?
One of the things that's really important is we make serotonin, which is one of the hormones that make us feel very satisfied, very content. It's one of the hormones that we really enjoy experiencing. All of that is produced, 80% of that is produced in your gut. So this brain gut connection is really, really prevalent and really brought into the awareness at the moment, because if you want to feel that sense of contentment that I've done something and now I'm really happy, then we need to look at the kind of food we are eating, because that will make a massive difference. But like we spoke about earlier, when I am really tired, I reach for my quick release glucose, which isn't helping my serotonin. So it's also knowing that actually, okay, if my brain's telling me something, maybe I can look at different ways of, satisfying that fatigue, ghrelin hormone, which is going, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. But like we said, we'll go on to solutions in the next part of this. The other thing is, we are all, you made such a powerful point. Everything's screen based, be it entertainment, be it work. And actually, when it comes to the brain, we have two types of vision, and our occipital system is a very big system in our brain. We have focus vision and we have panoramic vision. And one of the reasons we are so tired, more tired than we have ever been, is because we're overusing one sort of vision and we are not engaging the other sort of vision. So if our brain is constantly looking at a screen, that massive system, it's one of the biggest systems in the brain, the vision system, the occipital system, is being constantly overplayed. And if you overplay anything, you're going to overplay it and exhaust yourself.
Excellent. That's a brilliant cue for me to take you on to the next slide. Here's an interesting slide. Watch it and see it plays exactly to the point that Maria was making at this point of time. Now, this is a survey that was done by Gallup, a company that you all well know does a lot of surveys around the world. And this is, while it has really been done on US, and I know that this is pretty much prevalent around the world. And they've done, so the green bar is pre-COVID and the black bar is during COVID. And they're answering the question, percentage of employees who felt burnt out at work, and answer the very often and always in that question. And look at this about working at home and not working at home. So 30% of people pre-COVID felt that they were being burnt out if they do not work out from home. So the people who were working at home felt less burnt out. And now look at how it's moving to the last quadrant, whereby now pre-COVID, working from home all the time actually made people relaxed. But now with COVID, 29% feel that they are more burnt out. So if you're seeing the change that's taking place, exactly to the point why we're all feeling so locked down, it's screen time, not being able to go out and meet our friends, so sorry about that, not being able to meet our friends, not feeling restricted, spending time with a screen, all of those points that Maria and I have been making about. So it's a very interesting dynamic that we're seeing that's being picked up about lockdown, and hence you need to be so much more aware about it, or at an eye level, but also as an individual and organization level. I mean, here's another interesting statistics from Gallup. 76% of the time people have experienced burnout at some point of time. And the immense survey and research that they've done talks about certain points. And I want you to look at these points from the view of how life has been beyond COVID. Unfair treatment at work has been a cause that's always been causing fatigue and burnout as per Gallup. How is it that we might be doing unfair treatment at work at this moment of time? Are we having too many expectations of people? Is there unmanageable workload? Are we expecting that because people are at home, they're going to get more done because there's less travel time, without really understanding that they've got so many more work pressures, family pressures, and of course the stress and the other things that they're trying to manage because of health issues? So is it such something that might be exasperating the fatigue that our employees are feeling at any point of time? Or how about communication from managers or lack of manager support? What's the quality of managerial support? One of the biggest things that I'm working on right now with corporate executives is how managers need to be different, or how they need to manage differently, because remote working has come into place in such a big way. And we know it's here to stay. So how is it that we're going to manage people who are going to be working from home? Because it isn't the same as it was in the past, where there were a few Zoom calls that took place or a few work from home that was taking place. Now it's a reality. I mean, we have had UBS that has just announced, not UBS, sorry, HSBC announced that they're going to have Zoom free Fridays. LinkedIn gave their entire team 1 week off. So we are seeing these interesting conversations that are happening in corporations to manage this new reality. So how is it that you can ensure, if you're working in an organization and a business leader, how can you ensure that you're helping proactively stop people being fatigued in your organization, by this unreasonable time pressures, or any of those points which have been researched facts that cause burnout within an organization? Maria, any comments on that from your side as well, from what you're hearing in your work?
One of the things that I'm hearing from people is, picking up the point of expectations and unrealistic expectations. If I am not taking 45 minutes to get to work, then maybe I can be spending that time working. However, by doing those, changing the geography, changing what we're seeing, changing our environments, that actually refreshes the brain. So it's all very well thinking, oh, okay, I've got extra time, but not if it's the same. The brain actually re-energizes itself with novelty. So if we are doing, when you're on the tube and you're looking at all the different people, that changes. So we have to factor these things in now, because like you said, this is a new reality. So managers especially need to be taking these things into consideration, but bear in mind, it's happening to managers too. They're only guilty of being human. So I think there's, especially in Mental Health Resilience Week, I think it's really important to think we all need to be supporting each other, finding these new ways forward, because one brain's amazing and comes up with such amazing solutions, but 2 brains, 3 brains, if we all work together, we can really start to overcome what was happening anyway.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Maria, for those comments. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're getting to get clearer and perhaps revising your own knowledge, something that you knew about this topic on fatigue. And there's enough ammunition here for you to take back for your own life, your teams, your family members, because we certainly, as Maria is saying, want to present this as part of Mental Health Week. It's something which is so important. And we really want to raise awareness on this topic in this week and next week as well, because next week we're going to do part 2 solution. But here's an interesting one. This is known as the Yerkes-Dodson stress performance curve. So how is it that you know whether there's enough pressure, or it's too much or too less? And I'd love you to really take a screenshot of this if you can, or just Google Yerkes-Dodson and use it for yourself. Because what it says here is quite simply, is when you think about the performance and stress quadrant, there's a certain amount of stress level that helps us get to peak performance. If there's hardly any stress in our life, or what we say the adrenal cortisol, we might be feeling inactive or bored, and there'll be hardly any performance. We might not be doing anything. So, when there's no job, there's nothing to really excite us in life, we're feeling bored. That's really kind of the Yerkes-Dodson model brings up this whole point, is about you need a little bit of creative stress to be able to perform the most, where you feel motivated, where you feel focused, where there's peak performance. But that's where you need to watch out, Because if you're not watching it out and managing all of the PFC limbic dance, or you're not managing how you're performing, you're becoming too much of a perfectionist or not, is that you might start slinking into the other side of the curve where you start feeling fatigued. And too much of fatigue can lead to chronic exhaustion. And then you start having symptoms known as panic attacks. You start having anxiety attacks. You start having these moments where you're being angry all the time. And then it leads to burnout and breakdown. So there's this whole cycle. So just want to let you know that, a little bit of stress, enough manageable stress in moderation is a good thing for us. We're not saying that you should stop it out, but too much of it can lead into it. So it's a really helpful model that has been put forward for us to just keep in mind about how much stress am I feeling? Is it too much or too less? And what can I do about this is something, of course, which is the next chapter, just to raise the game on understanding about stress. That's what this all does. So I quite like this entire model. So what is it? Sorry, Maria.
One of the things I was wanting to interject is I am working with executives who have never before even heard or come across their own concept and experience of panic attack. And people are like, oh, I must be. And it's like, you are at this moment experiencing the symptoms of the situation. And I think that's really important to remember as well. We can bring the needle back. There are things that can really tip us over the edge, but we can bring the needle back. And that's what our next episode is around.
And also something which is very important is, while we will talk about the solutions and strategies that all of us can adopt to make it easier for ourselves, our teams, and help individuals grow better, businesses grow better, and that's so important at the time of regeneration of economy. But what we really want to stress upon today is that awareness is half the battle. We don't understand sometimes about what's happening in our body. Why is it that we are feeling certain things, or we're not able to recognize the symptoms? And so in a way, partly while we're talking about the science of it and not really the solution, fix it, this is part of the solution. This is understanding what's happening in fatigue and helping your colleagues understand it more, or your family members understand it more. So I encourage you to share the link with your friends and family members or your colleagues, or maybe share the concepts with them over your next Zoom call, dare I say, or your next Skype call. But yes, definitely spread the word, because this is important, not just because it's Mental Health Week, because it's an important topic and we feel passionate about it. So what is it that happens? So we've talked a lot about what happens in the brain, what are the causes, we've talked about the balance, where is it that it starts crossing the edge and it starts becoming a problem for us. So we started unpacking it. Here are some words that will really bring to life for you to recognize it. And it's a slide. I'm going to read it out because it's so well talked about how you can recognize it. So you have difficulty. I'm starting at 12 noon and I'm going to go clockwise down here and read it out. And then I'm going to invite Maria's closing comments and my closing comments before we close for today. So 12 o'clock noon starting. Difficulty understanding and managing complex problems and situations. We're not talking about those one or two moments, but if you start noticing that there is a difficulty that is consistently taking place on things that you could do earlier, it might be an amber or red flag that you need to watch out for. Problems with mood and behavior. You're finding that you're becoming too irritable, more irritable than usual. You're snapping very quickly. That's another symptom that might be happening. Reduced speed and accuracy. Something that you could do much faster. You've realized that it's taking far more time. There's more difficulty in learning and memory. And ladies and gentlemen, this might be something that you're experiencing, or you might watch and observe other people, because then you can help them, because they might be close to fatigue or beginning to show some signs of it. So difficulties with learning and memory, inability to assess and manage risks that are taking place. So sometimes people take impulsive risks. They feel we're just going to do it because it's an adrenal and cortisol high, and they kind of start having risky behavior or risky decisions. So that's another way to kind of spot whether somebody might be close to fatigue. Not to say that they are, but it's almost to say, wait a minute, is that an amber flag that I need to mention on? Can I help the person? Can I have a chat with the individual? Can I spend some time reflecting what's happening in my life? So it's really understanding it. Reduced ability to think laterally and be creative. You just can't come up with solutions. So I'm going down to 6 o'clock. Inability to regulate the performance, leading to increased risk taking, again, related to the point that was made earlier. Impaired comprehension and communication skills. sometimes that's what happens. People might go into a fight, flight, freeze syndrome, and they find that they can't speak for some time. It could be an anxiety attack. It could be a panic attack that's taking place. Decrease in work performance, so lethally important right now when we're trying to regenerate lives, economies, unemployment. And if people are fatigued out, how do they manage it out? How can we help them? Difficulty maintaining focus and attention, reduce ability to manage distractions. So you can see these are the ways that fatigue starts showing up, or the starting of fatigue starts showing up, and that's the time to make an intervention. But the awareness itself is a circuit breaker, is what we call in our language of coaching. You have to circuit break something before it continues ahead. Maria, can I invite you for some final closing comments on this topic before we close off for today?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rena. It is an ongoing important issue that needs to be addressed. One of the things the brain does is it normalizes things very quickly. Let's not normalize the fact that we are all slightly over fatigued at the moment. That's why we did today's broadcast. Sit with it, look at it, see what it is. Our brain wants solutions, but sometimes you've got to take the power of the pause to get aware of what's happening. Because once we're aware, then we can circuit break, and then we can take it forward properly, as opposed to do all of those impulsive things that our brain's trying to do just to make us feel better. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Those are my closing comments, Rena. And yourself?
Thank you much. Absolutely going to echo back what Maria's talked about. Pause, take a minute, understand, recognize fatigue. We'll come back next week for you for part 2 on how to combat fatigue, where we'll specifically talk about some solutions, strategies, and give you a couple of tools that you can walk away and embed into your life so that you can manage out your life and live a life of, a happier life, a far more safer, a life of well-being, and definitely a life of much stronger mental health, which is the week that we are celebrating this particular week. This is TBQ Live signing off. This is Maria Chase and Rena Dayal. We are the hosts for TBQ Live. We come here every fortnight, but we do make exceptions at times, and we'll be back next week, which is the 21st of May at 12:15 GMT to talk about how can you combat fatigue. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye for now. Thank you.